Automation is definitely a large part of it. One of the interesting things is how much it's opened up our possibilities as well in terms of applications where we couldn't do as humans. It's kind of got to that stage now where computing power is so much larger, faster and cheaper that we can take it to that next level, which is really interesting to see where it's going to take us further. But examples of that, I'd say like medical diagnosis and things like that.
Welcome to the Growth Trust podcast series. In this podcast series, we seek to reflect emerging trends that impact on small and medium enterprises. And artificial intelligence, or AI, is certainly one of them. AI throws up new challenges for everyone working in the business sector. Today, we'll be discussing this emerging phenomenon with Marshall Cowan, the CEO of Clevertar. He's a dynamic leader with a proven track record in delivering complex, mission-critical solutions. He has 23 years' experience as an entrepreneur and business founder. And as the former COO and director of Licorice, he successfully built an AI-driven platform for intelligent task management. We will chat with him shortly about the story of those various companies and the role AI has played in their development. This Growth Trust podcast series focuses on the issues facing many small and medium business enterprises that play such an important role in the Australian economy. In fact, the latest figures show small businesses contributed more than $500 billion to the local economy, equivalent to a third of the nation's GDP. This Growth Trust podcast is brought to you by the Australian Centre for Business Growth, which was established by the University of South Australia almost a decade ago. Over that time, the Centre's delivered world-class business growth programs, providing business owners, CEOs, managing directors and their executive team members with the knowledge and skills needed to grow their companies. Also with me in the studio, the Director of the Australian Centre for Business Growth, Ryan Williams. Marshall Cowan, to you first, and thanks very much for agreeing to be a part of this podcast. Tell us about your company, Clevertar. What services does it provide?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. Clevertar, we have been looking to revolutionise customer engagement through cutting-edge conversational AI. Been working in the space for since 2016. So yeah, we've been focusing on providing chatbots. We've worked with the ABS Census chatbot, SA Health chatbot for the COVID hotline, and really improving conversations and bring that forward to the people when it most matters.
So COVID's a great example. Give me an example of how that sort of technology would work in the COVID environment.
If you think back, obviously people were kind of restricted at home, and at that time the SA Health was getting lots of updates, new information all the time. And the key issue that they were facing was that they had a finite number of people who were on the phones and they couldn't disseminate that information to the public. So they were able to engage with us, and we deployed a chatbot that had based trained on their data that was getting updated regularly, and provided that in a live chat system, chatbot system really. So the public could ask questions, get up-to-date information, and it was one of the first times that they weren't absolutely swamped with questions and really able to provide up-to-date information to the public.
Well, that's a classic example too, because that everyone would understand that governments were overwhelmed. Health bureaucracies were completely overwhelmed with inquiries about what people should do. So that's a classic example where AI takes us to another level of service delivery in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. The challenges around information and the restrictions at that time particularly were like massive restrictions around people, and the changes in the workforce that happened was very disruptive, obviously. So having that readiness of contact and information was crucial to provide that.
Now tell us about Licorice and the work you did with that company as the former COO.
Yeah, great. Well, Licorice has been working on an AI scheduling platform. That in itself is most focused on the IT support industry, and it actually uses different AI subsystems, which I'm sure we'll go into more detail. But the idea behind that is it can analyze huge amounts of data, connect people through to the resource, the right resource to do the job that they're asking for. So there's a number of different algorithms and machine learning engines that go into that as a larger system.
So when we drill down into AI, it's one of those things where, it gets talked about and everyone acts like they know what it really means. How do you explain it to people who are still grappling with the concept? A conversation over the backyard fence to a neighbour who's not from your area of expertise.
Sure. Well, I suppose I'd start off by just saying, it's not new, for one thing. It has been around for a long time, the concept of being able to have a system do a task that would typically require human intelligence, such as problem solving or learning or reasoning, those types of things. That's really all it is. It's building a system and an application of that.
I think there's, if I cast my mind back, much of the AI journey in the public eye, is signposted by these big headline moments. So I recall it's probably about 94, where a computer beat Garry Kasparov over the board for the first time. I was like, the machines are taking over. I think that, when I think about AI and what it means for an average business, it's kind of like the application of systems and software technologies to automate and industrialize processes that previously would have required a person to be fielding that call. It's not dissimilar to what happened in the 1800s when we went from manual production lines to production lines that are assisted by machines to automate and scale up processes. And actually the net impact all the way down the pike is much more efficient organizations and greater deployment of, I guess, where human skill is. The first time I ever came across it in a live setting in a business was, and there are probably lots that was happening behind the scenes that I wasn't aware of, but when I was consciously aware, was a software package that a finance team introduced to help with processing of invoices and reconciling bank accounts. So it would scan the invoices that came in. It would say, this is an invoice from so-and-so, it's for this and it's this value. I match that back to something in the system and I say, here's where the purchase order was raised for that cost. Those numbers balance. This all checks. If those things don't balance, I kick it up to a person to please take a look. And then when the payments flow, if you've invoiced out and a payment hits the bank account of the company, and the software system says, this payment's come in from so-and-so, I'm looking at these invoices over here, that's a match, so I can tick that customer's paid. And if it doesn't match up, I kick it back to a human too. That was sort of the first iteration I'd ever seen in a very simplistic sense of what was going on in a company that I ran.
And just speeding things up considerably.
Yeah, I think automation is definitely a large part of it. One of the interesting things is how much it's opened up our possibilities as well in terms of applications where we couldn't do as humans. It's kind of got to that stage now where computing power is so much larger, faster and cheaper that we can take it to that next level, which is really interesting to see where it's going to take us further. But examples of that, I'd say like medical diagnosis and things like that. It's picking up or, diagnosis of cancers and things like that.
Absolutely. So let's drill down into SMEs though. Do you think AI will lead to better decision making by those running SMEs? After all, it does give CEOs the power to automate processes, analyse vast amounts of data and hopefully provide valuable insights. Does that necessarily translate to operational efficiency for SMEs, do you think?
I think it can. Yeah, absolutely. I think if AI is employed in an effective manner and responsibly, then absolutely it can have a huge impact on SMEs in terms of their operational efficiencies. And depends. There's huge scales of application as well. We talked a little bit about some of the early adoptions and early technologies. I think people will be really surprised at how much AI technology they're using on a day-to-day basis already. They don't even realize it.
Like what?
Siri, for example, was one. Even when you're texting, the auto-predictive text, that's not going to take over the world anytime soon. But
it can be annoying.
Autocorrect certainly.
But again, it's about getting on top of it and making sure that whenever you're using it, it's at the times you want to use it. So it's about understanding the processes by which you can get the best out of AI. But that's a classic example where that just speeds up You know, when it's kind of predicting what I want to say next, and it's speeding up my process of communication, I'm getting quicker at getting this message across to the client potentially.
Yeah, I think it really rings true from the point of technology, which is that technology is a tool to help us do our day-to-day lives, work or home lives better, faster. You know, it's to supplement and make us more effective and more efficient. So automation is part of that, obviously, but yeah.
I can think about an example in Clevertar where for an SME, let's say a small retailer that stood up an e-com business via Shopify, and you know they've got 2 or 3 folks employed in the business, and you've got customer queries coming in from all over the world. Can you ship here? How's it packed? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. All of these things that you've only got 2 or 3 people back at the ranch. If they were just manning the queries that came in,
they'd be swamped.
You know, they'd be swamped. And a system like Clevertar can engage as a first point of contact. It learns a whole bunch of the most common framing questions, and this is your business, so you're.
I was going to say you're telling it perfectly for me.
and manage a bunch of that dialogue and take 60 or 70% of the sweat out. So it's only the really unique and more challenging questions that then you'd have to deploy. So from a small business owner's perspective, you know, I've just been able to industrialize or create a lot more capacity than I otherwise would have had. And what about the use of AI systems to forecast customer demand? You know, in the old days, if you're in a clothing retailer, you'd have somebody sitting there going, oh, you know, we think that green's going to be the color for the next summer season, and they'd go and order. I mean,
Sure,
example, but you know, now you've got systems that can analyze what's going on in the world and say, oh, you know,
sucks up all the information of trends out there.
These are all the clothing lines that are moving, and actually, here's a way to think about how to leverage your old stock across different markets, because timing of fashion changes across different international jurisdictions. So that's a much larger enterprise. But you can think about how an intelligent, computer-driven system can analyze something in a way that a human being can't in that context.
So you're saying that marketing campaigns should get more slick, better targeted at clients. Inventory should be better managed because of this amount of data that the machine can process, whereas in years past you'd have a team of people going through the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the potential.
Yeah,
I guess.
Oh, I think that's already happening. You know, there's a number of companies that are employing, I mean, some of them are larger, like Domino's and Unilever have recently just announced that they've been employing inventory management AIs and tracking of things like that as a couple of different platforms internally. And that again, that's more of an algorithm machine learning as opposed to the ChatGPT style, which has become a lot more popular over this last year.
So to you, Ron, what does the Business Centre do in terms of guiding SMEs that want to maximise the power of AI?
I think, you know, rather than get into solutions, we wouldn't prescribe to somebody that this is something you should or shouldn't be using. We'd help people navigate, you know, what does the journey look like for you to grow your business, right? And if you can understand what that long arc looks like, what does that mean then that you break that down into a set of discrete things, whether that's market entry. We were chatting in another podcast about going international. So, you know, which areas would you want to be in? And I use that as a specific example because I can think perhaps you want to go into a jurisdiction for your product where English isn't the predominant language, and you can use conversational AI to help close some of the gaps in customer engagement. Again, if you're an e-com or retail-facing business. So we would help folks think through, you know, these are the things that you're going to be doing, the initiatives, and then how do you make those things more efficient? Is there a use for technology in a particular area? In the same way as you'd think about, I'm going to be manufacturing something, and so I need to ensure that I can spool up a factory or a production line or get a third-party provider and source the materials in. Well, how would you treat that from your customer intelligence point of view? How is your finance process optimized? How are how are your marketing messages optimized? How are your ordering systems optimized? And how are you applying technology to do those things? Sometimes growth is not about just a revenue push or a customer push. Sometimes growth is about finding ways to make your business more efficient. So you could have a phase where you're saying, actually, for the next year or 18 months, I'm fine if revenue stays flat because I'm going to be introducing these systems that'll make the business far more efficient. So I'm still growing the business actually at the bottom line. And I'm setting up a business that's more industrialized, that in 5 years' time, we turn on the taps from a revenue point of view and I have much better extraction than I otherwise would have had.
I can hear the naysayers, though. I can hear those who are fearful of this level of technology, and they'd be saying, that AI can automate repetitive, mundane tasks, frees up valuable time and resources for more strategic activities, etc. AI-powered chatbots can handle customer inquiries and provide real-time assistance, etc. All sounds wonderful, but should we be careful about removing the human element in customer relations? I'd imagine, someone from a slightly different era, an older style, entrepreneur who's set up a business and thinks this sort of stuff really terrifies me. I know my customer best when I speak to them as a human to human experience. How do you explain that stuff to them?
Yeah, I think it's really important to not think about AI as removing the personal touch. I mean, it's an interesting and fairly nuanced thing, obviously, but having, particularly as we were saying before in that example, where you have a Shopify store, for example, you have a whole lot of people coming in and asking questions. What that can do is it can free up the two people who are there trying to answer all of these questions to then answer the really tough questions. And one of the biggest issues at the moment, the biggest frustration around online shopping and e-commerce, the number one frustration was waiting for a reply. 58% of respondents to a survey said that waiting for a reply was the most frustrating thing that they experienced. Obviously, e-commerce is going to be a large, probably a large portion of the listeners here as well. So having the ability to provide that immediacy to the customers with what the customers actually want is really important. And another aspect around this is if you think about millennials, again, this is a generational thing. I'm a Gen Xer, so I struggle sometimes. But millennials, which are the largest population at the moment, most of them don't want to talk to someone on the phone, right? They just want immediate answers. They're happy to do chat. They're quite happy with chat. So in terms of bridging that gap, there's absolutely an element. One of the questions that I still have is how do SMEs incorporate these kind of technologies and take their team on the journey? And one of the biggest issues I think that faces SMEs in taking up AI is around, engagement with their team and making sure that everyone's on board. Because like you said, not everyone is, this is great, I'm on board. There's some trepidation behind it, absolutely.
I think, if you cast your mind back over all of the technological progress, there'd always be somebody going, the way to think about this is if you're a business that would like to grow, this is a new suite of technologies, or perhaps not such a new suite of technologies, that can make the business more efficient and that will help drive and catapult growth, which creates benefit for people that I employ, creates more employment, services more customers, provides better quality products or experiences or services out there. And you can choose to adopt or not to adopt. But those businesses that adopt the newer technologies will be those businesses that have more sustainable competitive advantages, generally speaking. And so you can elect to opt out of that. But I would argue that many of these things, it's as foundational as, there aren't very many businesses these days that you could walk into where there wouldn't be some form of computer in the building.
Absolutely. So those conversations that you have with these different demographics about AI, I'm interested in that in the sense that you talked about millennials. They don't necessarily want to chat to someone face to face or talk over the phone. And I've noticed that I work in newsrooms and the young journos text everything. And you sometimes say, have you spoken to the person yet, to find out, because you can read something from the way in which they respond as to whether they're a willing participant in this story or not. That sort of stuff, but they're very loath to do that. They work off this texting or email or whatever. So how do you have these conversations with people from different demographics to get the boomer across the line,
Well, that's a tough one. But I think it does come down to, if you talk about the market in general from SMEs, if you're not willing to do something to stay up to date with the currency of the technology movements, there's a number of challenges that's going to
things
bring
will happen.
towards you. Yeah. Particularly things along, like you're saying, the competitive advantage, but efficiencies. Your competitors will have the efficiencies over you. And one of my mentors has said, that your competitor's quite willing to do what you're not.
Yes.
So,
the lesson there.
You don't have to do it, but it's the same as when the internet first came out and, people started putting websites up, and not everyone was putting up a website. Everyone still held on to the yellow pages as the first point of call, right?
Yeah.
Yellow pages still exists.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, it's not very thick anymore, I don't think, but...
Well, I remember that line from Don Draper, change is not good, change is not bad, change is.
Change is.
And just change is, and get used to the fact that things will change, and if you don't keep up, you will fall by the wayside. Can you give me some examples, though, from your career where you've seen this change to AI literally revolutionise the way in which a company's gone about doing, an SME's gone about operating, and its performance has been enhanced exponentially?
Well, I've got one case study, I suppose, or I'd mention is Mate Telecom. So they're an Australian-based telecom. I think they're based in Sydney. They've employed an AI conversational chatbot in this example as well. That's my area of expertise. Once they deployed that, it had a massive reduction in their operating overhead, the staff that they had who were handling the live support calls and that sort of thing, and they were able to then shift their staff who were previously doing the live chat. They transitioned them over to handling phone calls and emails for more personal touch by automating that lower end. So in a way, they've moved in the opposite direction. They've got more staff who are now doing more personal stuff, because AI is great at, the common knowledge-based type questions, the frequently asked questions. Very easy to handle those sort of things. It's the more complex problems, or the ones that require a lot more deeper insight into the customer. Nuance as well, yeah.
I could imagine something where you have a system like that to handle the queries of, I've forgotten my password. And the person that would have taken up time answering that call could now be the person making an outbound sales call to help somebody upgrade their system or whatever it is that creates other benefits for the company. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. It frees up resources within the company to focus on more important tasks like growing the business. Yeah. So, and that's the benefits of technology and of automation, but there's always a resistance to it. Absolutely.
So for you, Ryan, you've worked in a number of businesses, both here and overseas. And what have you seen in terms of that adoption of technology transforming a company?
Probably about 2015, somewhere around about there. We were doing some work with an Irish business that had developed an algorithm for the early days of media ad buying in the Facebook, or particularly in the Facebook or Meta, and what we would call today the Meta universe. And it was far more efficient than any other system that was out there in the marketplace. So we were helping them get installed with customers where they were reducing costs of marketing, customer acquisition by as much as 30-40% out the gates, like week one. And so now we've got much more efficient ad spend, and that meant that I could either deploy more marketing money into market or redeploy that money somewhere else. And very quickly that system was adopted into the Google ecosystem as well. So now you had one place where I could put my ad dollars in the front end, and the system would allocate best place to invest that money for an actual sales result that they were experiencing. I mean, when I saw this for the first time, I was like, oh, this is like magic. I hadn't personally encountered something like that before. When I came back home, I was on the phone to our COO saying, Grant, we got to do this, man. We got to get this into system. And actually with them, we piloted an ability to provide marketing messages into a real world till transaction. So not just a digital piece, but we could tie what messaging we were putting out into those ad platforms to the actual transaction that happened on Tuesday at 5:00. And so work out how to make that real world engagement also more efficient. And of course, time has marched on. There are many of these systems now, and probably more advanced systems. But that would be an early case of something I'd seen applied.
So I'm running my own SME. I'm a bit daunted by all of this. What are the issues I have to take on board? I mean, I've got to think about obviously cost, the expertise of my team, training. How do you take someone who's embracing AI through that journey so that they get that right?
I think the first thing really is kind of be fairly honest with yourself about your maturity level around AI. And I don't think it's the type of thing that people want to be just throwing money at and doing because they can. Really, it comes back, I think, like you were saying before, Ryan, you want to focus on what is the core vision and the mission of the business. If their focus is on customer service, then, really focus on that. Or if it's logistics and supply chain, then look at, how can AI really impact on that part of the business.
So you're saying, in a sense, don't embrace a fad, a trend for its own sake. Work out what it is that your company specialises in. Start with the end in mind, if you know what I mean, and then how can AI facilitate that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are ways to start getting wet a little bit in terms of how you can get a taste of it. And the large language models, for example, are a great example of getting used to some of the new technology that's out there. But that's only one, as I said, that's only one slice of the AI pie.
Give me an example of what you mean by that.
In terms of the slice of the AI pie. So well, natural language understanding is one subset of artificial intelligence. So that's the conversational AI.
Yep.
But you've got perception, there's another part like computer vision, and that's used a lot in facial recognition.
Yep.
You see it a lot in license plate.
We're seeing it more.
Tracking.
The car park I use today.
Yes.
You pull in suddenly, at first I'm wondering what's going on here. I mean, where's the ticket and all this sort of stuff,
Yeah. Go on to the chalk marks on the tires, right?
Yeah.
So there's all these different aspects of AI that can result in a change, fundamental change in how a business, an SME, can operate. And again, you want to really align those different aspects to different business units. You kind of mentioned earlier marketing. I think that's a really good one to start with because, again, a lot of depending on the types of AIs, but for example, the lowest cost entry AI at the moment is to have a play around with things like ChatGPT or Bard or some of these other large language models. And I think most people haven't, and if you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. You can have a play around, but it's really good at generating things. So marketing copy is a really great thing. It can really help you streamline your ability to update your website and keep it current.
There's a health warning there, which is that, I don't know if it's apocryphal, you'll probably be able to correct me, but I gather that a large electronics manufacturer in an earlier phase of one of these, somebody uploaded a whole bunch of new product info and got, I think it was ChatGPT to write up some marketing copy, not realizing that the free version that they were using on the web, that's all now open source. So they're taking a whole bunch of confidential company information and made it available to the world. So you also need to make sure that you recognize, is that true? Is that a real thing?
Absolutely it is. Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And can that have issues copyright-wise as well? Like, is it sucking up information maybe from places that you don't have clearance to use?
It's an interesting part. I know there's actually, I want to clarify something. It's not, when you have a session with ChatGPT, the information that you provide, it does go to OpenAI, and they're an American-based company, and of course that then goes down to the data and security, privacy laws around the US, around data, etc. But yeah, you're providing that data to them. It doesn't go wider to the public. The reason behind that, and these large language models such as ChatGPT are trained on a large subset of data, pretty much most of the internet, right? And there's a lot of questions coming up currently about, privacy and copyright around people's content being used to train these large language models. It's billions and billions of data points that they're actually trained on.
Interesting. You mentioned before, you can get wet, without diving in. You can sort of dip the toe. And you mentioned as an example, maybe the idea of looking at your own website and using that, because it's a classic example of where people set up their website, they kind of ignore it because they're not the customer going in to check all the time what's there, and it may become a bit dated. It doesn't incorporate some of the latest elements that should be in that. So you're saying that you could use AI to have a look at where you sit, and just that's a way to sort of maybe take an initial plunge to see, in terms of marketing, what you should be looking at.
Yeah, I think you can certainly have a play around, and it can help you write copy for your website.
Yep.
I don't think it's really going to analyze your website and say what's best for you, but one of the good things is that you can have, and if you're curious about your SME, the industry you're in, just go in and look for, do a search, web search for, ChatGPT prompts for insert industry name here, plumbing, electrician, hairdressing, whatever you're working in, and you'll get, like, there's people out there who've now published and say, hey, this is a really great thing to do, and it can help not just from marketing, but also then, provide various things, whether that's actual knowledge about the business or
just rethink your business.
Just rethink, it can help you challenge some of the things that you haven't thought about before, and certainly what's current, absolutely.
It's a great example of how you could dip into this. So we've talked about a lot of the benefits. It speeds up time. You can suck up more information, process information quickly. It's got lots of marketing benefits. What would you say some of the pitfalls are for people who think, I've got to get into this thing, I've got to embrace it, but what should they be thinking about in terms of some of the downsides?
Yeah, I think privacy and security is actually probably one of my main bugbears at the moment. And that, in Australia, we don't have a large language model based in Australia that you could use. So from that perspective, so you are using a product that's software as a service online, so that comes with its risks. So I would definitely not suggest, putting in confidential information into it.
Yeah.
People will invariably put personal information in there, and that's up to you as to how comfortable you are with that. But yeah, definitely don't use confidential information. The other thing is that it's really good at generating content, but it does this based on a probabilistic method, right? So it's not always going to be 100% factually correct. And the example behind this was a legal team in the US tried to use ChatGPT to help it write its closing argument. And it did a fantastic job, except that it started quoting precedents that didn't exist. ChatGPT had actually made them all up, right? So yeah, if you do want to use it for factual things, you do definitely need to do a fact.
I heard somebody somewhere along the line, a commentator speaking about in AI systems, what differentiates conversational AI from a human oftentimes is the point of view. It doesn't have a point of view, whereas a human would.
Yeah.
And so that human interaction for the more complex stuff around developing a point of view on something, if that's a legal argument or a piece of marketing collateral, whatever, you still need to cast that lens and say, I'm comfortable with this. And I think the watch out for me would be, this is not autopilot. You're in a car where you take your hands off the wheel. You still need to be in control of the vehicle, although the vehicle's got sensors and will help with braking and warn you if you're out of the lane. It may manage your speed in the vehicle, those sorts of things. It'll do a whole bunch of stuff for you that makes for a safer, more comfortable driving experience. But that still doesn't mean that you can drive with your eyes closed.
Yeah, so it's a great analogy in the sense I was thinking, you mentioned legal issues. A person dealing with their own SME decides that I'll chatbot GTP for some legal advice about, it's not the same as someone who works in this field in your town with your clients. I mean,
and understands the laws in that particular jurisdiction.
So it'll provide an answer. It might not be the answer.
Yeah.
So be mindful of that.
So where do you see AI assisting SMEs into the future? Can you see radical ways in which it's going to transform the ways in which small, medium enterprises operate in future?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
As the technology gets advances, it's going to become even cheaper, the cost of computing. And that really means that we're going to be able to have much more tailored systems and solutions that SMEs can use directly, whether that's an application provided by a company that's specific for that industry, and there's already lots of those coming out now, we don't even know yet how far it's going to go. Again, it's one of those transformative technologies that it's in this height right now that everything is kind of changing. You know, we've got things from, you know, AI beer is happening. You know, it's a lot, like there's applications everywhere that you can think of.
Yeah.
So in the future, yes, it's going to be readily available in the future. At the moment, there's still a slight barrier to entry, and that's that maturity level and kind of slightly cost prohibitive for SMEs, I think, depending on what you want to do. If it's a analytics thing or a computer vision thing or something like that, that's a little bit more complex, and you probably need to outsource to.
There's a way to think through this, right? Which is the functional disciplines in a business haven't changed. You know, there is a finance function, there's a sales function, there's a marketing function, there's a production function. You know, logistics. So you could break your business down into these discrete blocks. And you could analyze it through the lens of, okay, what's the latest technology, or where is there efficiency to be gained if I think about our finance function? What happens in finance? And how would I deploy technology to make that more efficient or better? If I think about the sales piece, do I have an AI system that does route planning for a sales force that's out on the ground? Or in the logistics function, a system that does dynamic live on the day, depending on traffic conditions, does plotting and mapping for your best and most optimal delivery schedule.
But you've still got to stick to basic principles, don't you? About
100%.
each one of those things. You don't. The technology doesn't change the basic principle. It's what you started with in the beginning.
And as the organisation grows and matures, there might be ways that you start to have, you know, systems thinking about how this piece is connected to that piece, and maybe there's some bridge over here. But I think as a first step out of the gate, a really simple way to start the analysis process is to think about it in each lane and then work forwards from there.
So where does Clevertar go from here?
We, not that long ago, a couple of months now, we released our high growth product for Shopify, which is available now on the Shopify App Store. It's called Conversagent. So people can just download that and deploy it straight out to their Shopify store, and it ingests all the information from that Shopify store and provides direct answers. So we've got an opportunity for people to just jump straight in and try it. If you've got a Shopify store, you can go to conversagent.app. There's my plug for today. So that's where we're focusing on that. But we're also doing a lot of work and continued work in bespoke environments. So we're continuing to work with the SA government on a number of other conversational AI opportunities, as well as a lot of the small to medium enterprises as well. So we've got, in fact, I'll give another case study if you don't mind, which is a really interesting use case in my perspective. It's a software as a service company. They are called Real-Time Conveyancer, and they've just deployed their own website app. They've deployed out our chatbot solution to their system for their users to, you know, as a knowledge base. It's like kind of bridging that gap and
internally focused
upskilling
at their
people.
staff?
It's both. So it's kind of for their staff, but it's also for the users of the product. So that you know, the different applications, we just don't even know where it's going to end yet. So you know, we're excited to.
But again, that's all about sucking up the amount of information that's out there and synthesizing it in the most effective way.
Yeah, so that's using that natural language understanding, and it's called retrieval augmented generation, which is another fun
Lots
acronym.
of acronyms.
So many acronyms.
Another acronym for the future.
Right.
Marshall, thank you very much for your insights today. It's been fascinating talking to you and seeing where this goes in future, and obviously plenty for Ryan and the Centre to think about too, about services and products that they offer in future. But great insights today. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your company today. If you'd like more information about the issues raised in this podcast or other related topics, please visit our website at www.centreforbusinessgrowth.com. And a quick reminder that you can always tune in to the Growth Trust podcast on Spotify, Google, Apple or YouTube. Bye for now.